I never imagined I'd be sitting alone in my car, staring at a text message that would change my life. It was simple, casual even. A message from my wife, something that shouldn't have been alarming, but it was. Hey babe, just a heads up, I'm going on a weekend trip with some friends. Thought I'd tell you before I booked the tickets. At first, I read it twice, then a third time, wondering why it felt so wrong. My wife, Meredith, wasn't the spontaneous type. She planned things weeks, even months in advance. If she was going on a trip, she would have told me long before booking tickets. And yet, here she was, presenting it as a fait accompli. A quiet unease settled in my chest. Oh? Who's going? I texted back, keeping it casual. Her response came fast. Just some friends from work. You don't know them. That was when something in my stomach twisted. Meredith and I had been married for 7 years. We shared almost everything. I knew her close friends, I knew her work colleagues. If these were friends from work that I had never heard of, what did that mean? My fingers hovered over the keyboard. Should I push? Should I let it go? Where are you going? A pause. This time longer. Then, just a little getaway in the mountains. Nothing crazy, just to relax. My pulse picked up. The mountains. A secluded trip. Just her and some friends. I tried to shake the feeling creeping into my gut, telling myself I was overthinking it. But my hands felt cold, my chest felt tight. I didn't like this. And deep down, I already knew why. That night, Meredith was in a great mood. She moved around the house humming to herself, folding laundry, texting someone on her phone with a small smile on her lips. When I walked past, she tilted the screen away slightly, just enough to make me notice. I forced a smile. So, this trip, when do you leave? She glanced up, her expression open, unbothered. Friday after work. I nodded, keeping my voice even. And you're driving there? Yeah, I'll just carpool with them. Them. She still hadn't given me a single name. My mind started going to dark places, connecting dots I didn't want to connect. But I needed proof. So, for the first time in my life, I did something I never thought I would do. I waited until she fell asleep, then I checked her phone. I told myself it wasn't wrong, that I had a reason, that I wasn't crazy. But when my hands trembled as I entered her passcode, my own wife's passcode, I knew this was something I could never take back. The messages were there, waiting. And it took less than a minute to find what I feared. A text thread with someone named Graham. I can't wait for the weekend. Finally, just the two of us. Red heart. My heart slammed against my ribs. I scrolled up, eyes moving fast, scanning weeks of conversations. Messages exchanged during work hours. Inside jokes I had never heard before. Plans carefully made. It'll be perfect. No one to worry about. I'm glad we're finally doing this. I don't know what I'd do without you. I swallowed hard. There were no explicit words. No pictures. Nothing that could be considered solid, undeniable proof. But I didn't need it. I knew. And the worst part? She had never planned on telling me. I didn't sleep that night. I lay beside her, listening to her breathe, feeling the weight of betrayal settle over me like a thick fog. Every inhale, every unconscious shift of her body felt like a punch to my gut. She loved someone else. Maybe not in words, not yet. But in actions. In secrets. And I had to figure out what to do next. The world felt different the next morning. Quieter. Colder. Meredith was in the kitchen when I walked in, sipping her coffee like it was just another day. She smiled when she saw me, completely unaware that my entire reality had shifted overnight. Morning, she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. I looked at her, really looked at her. The woman I had spent 7 years with. The woman who once whispered secrets to me in the dark, who held my hand when life got hard, who promised me forever. And now? She was someone I didn't recognize. Morning, I said, my voice careful. I sat down at the table, watching as she moved through the kitchen with ease. She poured herself another cup, then glanced at her phone, a quick, instinctive check. She smiled. I knew who she was smiling at. My grip on the coffee mug tightened. Looking forward to your trip? I asked. Her head snapped up slightly, just a fraction of hesitation before she nodded. Yeah, it'll be nice to unplug for a bit. Unplug? She meant from me. I forced a chuckle. Yeah, you deserve it. Her shoulders relaxed, her smile widening. She had no idea that I had seen everything. And maybe that was my advantage. The day crawled by. I went to work, but my mind wasn't there. Every email, every conversation, every minor inconvenience blurred together. All I could think about was that text thread. Those words. Just the two of us. She was planning on coming home Sunday night like nothing had happened. Sliding into her bed, kissing me, saying she missed me. And I would have never known. The weight of that crushed me. I had spent years believing that if something like this ever happened, I would know. That love was some kind of shield against betrayal. That I would sense it, feel it, recognize the signs. But the truth? I had never seen it coming. That realization was almost worse than the affair itself. That night, I didn't sleep again. Meredith, on the other hand, slept peacefully. At one point, I rolled onto my side and just watched her. The woman who had promised to love me. The woman who had planned an entire weekend away with another man without a shred of guilt. I wanted to wake her up. I wanted to shake her and demand, why? When did I stop being enough? But I didn't. Instead, I laid there, staring at the ceiling until the first rays of sunlight peeked through the blinds. And that was when I made my decision. The next morning, I played my part. I kissed her cheek before she left for work. I asked about her weekend plans again, pretending not to notice the slight tension in her shoulders. I acted normal. Because I had a plan now. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to give her the privilege of seeing my pain. No. I was going to do something better. I was going to let her go. The days leading up to her trip felt like I was living someone else's life. I went to work. I answered emails. I smiled at coworkers. I laughed when I was supposed to laugh. I even held conversations I barely remembered as soon as they ended. But inside? Inside, I was unraveling. Every moment alone with my thoughts felt like stepping too close to the edge of a cliff, staring down into a void I didn't know how to escape. She was still texting him. Still lying to me. Still kissing me goodbye in the morning with the same lips she used to tell him how excited she was for their weekend together. And the worst part? I let her. I let her pretend everything was normal. I let her believe I was the same trusting husband she had taken for granted. Because I wasn't ready for the truth to break open just yet. I needed to be strong first. I needed to be ready. The night before she left, we had dinner together. I had considered skipping it, saying I had late work or that I wasn't feeling well, but in the end, I needed to sit across from her one last time. She made pasta, her favorite, not mine. I watched her pour a glass of wine, her movements effortless, the ease of routine keeping her comfortable. I wondered if she ever thought about what she was doing to me. If she ever looked at me and felt even the slightest bit of guilt. Or was she just that good at pretending? She sat down, fork twirling in her pasta, and smiled at me like nothing was wrong. So, I was thinking, she started, maybe we should take a trip too. Just us. After I get back. My stomach clenched. She wanted a second trip. With me. A reward for the husband who didn't know his wife had spent a weekend in another man's arms. I swallowed, forcing myself to nod. That sounds nice. She smiled. Yeah? Maybe somewhere tropical? I took a sip of my drink. Sure. You pick the place. She brightened. I'll look up some options when I get back. When she gets back. Like nothing had happened. Like I wouldn't know. Like she would come home, slip into my arms and let me hold her, touch her, love her without ever realizing where she had been. I clenched my jaw, stabbing my fork into my plate, my hand tightening around the handle. She didn't notice. Of course she didn't. Because I had never been a suspect in her mind. That night, she packed her suitcase. I watched from the doorway, leaning against the frame, arms crossed over my chest. She hummed softly as she folded her clothes, carefully placing them inside. She packed light. Comfy sweaters, jeans, a single dress. I wondered if she had picked it for him. She noticed me watching and smiled. You okay? I forced a chuckle. Yeah. Just thinking about what I'll do with my free weekend. She grinned. Gonna miss me? I stared at her. At the way she stood there, completely at ease, as if she hadn't spent the last few weeks carefully constructing a lie she planned to carry out tomorrow. I smiled. Of course. She laughed. I'll bring you back something. Maybe a cheesy souvenir. She zipped up her bag. I love you, she said softly. I felt my stomach turn. I had said those words to her 1,000 times. And every time before this, I had believed them. But now? Now they felt hollow. She was still lying. Even in this moment, standing just feet away from me, she was choosing him. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and forced myself to meet her eyes. I love you, too. And just like that, she went to bed, content, blissfully unaware that this was the last time I would ever say those words to her. I didn't sleep. I laid beside her, staring at the ceiling, listening to her breathe, knowing exactly where she would be this time tomorrow. I tried to picture who she was before this. The woman I had married. The woman who used to look at me like I was her entire world. Was that version of her ever real? Or had I just never noticed the cracks? I got up before dawn, unable to take the silence any longer. I sat in the living room, staring at nothing. My mind an endless loop of everything I had seen. The texts. the lies, the way she packed for him with the same ease she used to pack for me. I wanted to be angry. I wanted to hate her. But mostly I just felt empty. Like I had been living in a house I thought was warm and safe, only to realize too late that the foundation had already collapsed beneath me. I wasn't mad that she was leaving. I was mad that she thought I'd still be here when she got back. The morning was surreal. She woke up, showered, got dressed, business as usual. She kissed my cheek before grabbing her suitcase, adjusting the strap over her shoulder. "I'll text you when I get there," she said. I nodded. She smiled. "I'll miss you." I swallowed down the bitter taste in my mouth. "Same." She walked to the door, opened it. Then she hesitated. For the first time, she hesitated. She turned back slightly, her brow furrowed, her lips parting like she wanted to say something. Like maybe some small part of her felt it. Felt that something was different. But then, just as quickly, she shook it off, and she walked out the door. I stood there for a long time after she was gone. I don't know what I was expecting. Some kind of relief? A sudden wave of freedom? But all I felt was grief. Because now it was real. Now there was no more pretending. No more hoping I was wrong. No more maybe I misunderstood. Meredith wasn't mine anymore. And maybe she never had been. The silence in the house felt heavier now. She was gone. I stood in the same spot by the door, staring at nothing, listening to the sound of my own heartbeat. I thought it would feel different when she finally left. Maybe there'd be relief, maybe anger, maybe some sudden clarity about what to do next. But all I felt was emptiness, like a part of me had walked out with her. I let out a slow breath and moved toward the kitchen, grabbing the coffee pot, but then I stopped. My hand hovered over the counter. Her mug was still there. Her favorite one, the blue ceramic with the little crack on the side. The one she used every morning. The one she had laughed about when she dropped it a year ago and promised she'd never replace. It was still sitting next to the sink, the faint outline of coffee inside, like she had planned on coming back to it. Like she had planned on coming back to me. I clenched my jaw, grabbed it, and threw it in the trash. I spent the next few hours aimlessly wandering the house, picking things up, putting them down, trying to shake the feeling that I was living in someone else's home. I didn't know what to do with myself. Normally, my Saturdays were ours. We'd go grocery shopping together, clean up the house, maybe plan a lazy dinner while watching a movie. But today she was with him. I checked my phone. No messages. She hadn't texted to say she had arrived. She didn't need to. She was exactly where she wanted to be. I exhaled slowly and set my phone down. I needed to get out of here. I ended up driving for hours. Nowhere specific, just away. Away from the house. Away from the reminders. Away from the thoughts that refused to let me breathe. At some point, I ended up by the lake. It wasn't a place I had planned on going. But as soon as I saw the familiar curve of the shoreline, I pulled over. Meredith and I used to come here. Back when we were younger, before marriage, before life got complicated. We'd bring sandwiches, lay out a blanket, talk for hours. It had always felt like ours. Now, it just felt like a memory belonging to another lifetime. I got out of the car, walked to the edge of the water, and sat down on the old wooden bench overlooking the lake. It was quiet here, peaceful. For the first time all day, my thoughts slowed down. I closed my eyes and let myself just feel. I didn't want to be angry. I didn't want to be bitter. I didn't want this to define me. But I also couldn't deny the truth anymore. She wasn't coming back in the way I wanted her to. And I needed to accept that. I stayed at the lake until the sun dipped lower in the sky, until the golden light reflected off the water in a way that almost made me feel okay again. Then, finally, I pulled out my phone, and I typed out a single message. "We need to talk when you get back." I hesitated. Then I hit send. And for the first time in days, I felt like I was the one in control. The message was sent. It sat there on my screen, staring back at me, small and simple but heavy with meaning. "We need to talk when you get back." I imagined the moment her phone buzzed. Was she with him when she read it? Did she glance at the screen, bite her lip, and quickly tuck it away before Graham could see? Or did she feel a flicker of guilt, a momentary hesitation before she pushed it aside and let herself sink back into the illusion she had built? I wanted to know. But I also didn't. I exhaled slowly and locked my phone, shoving it into my pocket. Whatever came next, I was ready. Or at least, that's what I told myself. The house felt different that night. Colder. I moved through it aimlessly, my body following the same routines out of habit, but nothing felt real. I wasn't hungry, but I made dinner anyway. I wasn't tired, but I crawled into bed at my usual time. I wasn't okay, but I kept telling myself I was. And then, the phone buzzed. My breath caught in my throat. I hesitated before reaching for it, my fingers hovering over the screen for a moment too long. Then finally, I flipped it over. Meredith, everything okay? I stared at the words, my pulse drumming in my ears. Everything okay? That was it? Not, what do you mean? Not, is something wrong? Not even a vague attempt at pretending she missed me? Just that. Like she already knew. Like she felt the shift, sensed that the ground beneath her carefully constructed story was beginning to crack. I could reply. I could tell her that no, everything was not okay. That I knew. That I had seen the texts. That I had spent the last few days drowning in the weight of her lies. But I didn't. Instead, I let the message sit there unanswered. Because she could wait. The next morning, I woke up feeling something I hadn't felt in days. Clarity. For the first time, I wasn't consumed by the what-ifs. I wasn't spiraling through every possible scenario, every imagined excuse she might give. I knew what was real now. And it wasn't up to her to decide how this ended. It was up to me. The weekend crawled by. I didn't text her again. She didn't either. I imagined she was waiting for me to break first. Waiting for me to send a follow-up, to ask if she was enjoying her trip, to pretend like I didn't know where she really was. But I refused to play the part of the clueless husband anymore. I spent most of Saturday doing things that felt normal. Laundry. Cleaning out the garage. Even going for a long drive with no destination in mind, just to clear my thoughts. And for the first time, the weight in my chest didn't feel unbearable. I wasn't okay yet. But I was getting there. Sunday night arrived, and with it, the moment I had been waiting for. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels, when I heard the familiar sound of the garage door opening. My body tensed instinctively. A few seconds later, the front door unlocked, and there she was. Meredith. She stepped inside, her bag slung over one shoulder, her hair slightly messy, a faint glow still lingering on her skin, like she had spent the whole weekend basking in the warmth of something forbidden. She looked at me, and for the briefest second I saw it. The hesitation. The flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Like she knew this wasn't the same house she had left. Like she knew I wasn't the same man who had kissed her goodbye. She let out a soft breath, setting her bag down. Hey. I didn't move. Didn't speak. She shifted slightly, glancing toward the kitchen like she was already planning to slip back into our routine. Like she thought she could. Then she turned back to me. Everything okay? I tilted my head slightly. The same words she had sent me in that text. The ones she had used to test the waters. I let the silence stretch. Let it weigh between us. Then, finally, we need to talk. She froze. Not visibly. Not in a way most people would notice. But I had studied her for years. I knew her habits, her body language, the tiny tells she thought were imperceptible. And right now, I saw the way her shoulders stiffened, the way she shifted her weight just slightly, preparing herself for whatever came next. But she wasn't ready. Not for this. We sat across from each other at the dining table, our usual place for conversations that mattered. The air between us was thick, heavy with unspoken truths. She folded her hands together, her eyes scanning my face like she was trying to read how much I knew. I didn't let her. I know, Meredith. The words were simple. Direct. But they hit. Her lips parted slightly. No, what? I exhaled sharply. Don't do that. Her jaw tensed. I don't know what you're talking about. I leaned back, watching her carefully. You don't. She shook her head. No. My fingers drummed against the table. So if I asked you where you've been this weekend, you'd say, what? A work retreat? A spa getaway? Silence. I let it stretch, waiting to see if she would break first. She didn't. She was good at this. Too good. But I was better. I pulled out my phone and slid it across the table. The screen was open to her messages. To him. Her face drained of color. For a moment, she didn't move. Didn't breathe. Then, slowly, she reached for the phone with trembling fingers, as if touching it might somehow erase what was on the screen. She started, but stopped. Because what was there to say? She had been caught. And she knew it. I watched her swallow hard, her hands tightening around the device, her entire body going rigid. Then finally she let out a shaky breath. I can explain. I tilted my head slightly. Can you? Her lips trembled. And for the first time in our marriage, I saw it. Fear. Not fear of getting caught. Fear of what came next. Because she wasn't in control anymore. I was. She sat there, staring at the screen, her hands gripping my phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. I could hear her breathing short, uneven. The silence stretched between us, thick with everything she wasn't saying. Finally, she swallowed and forced out the words. I didn't mean for this to happen. I exhaled sharply, leaning back in my chair. That's the best you've got? She flinched. I watched her carefully, waiting. This was the moment where she could have come clean, where she could have told the truth instead of trying to manipulate me one last time. But she didn't. She looked up at me with wide, teary eyes, the same expression she used when she wanted to get out of trouble. I had seen it before, over stupid arguments, over moments when she twisted the truth just enough to make herself look like the victim. But this wasn't a stupid argument. This was our marriage. Please, she whispered, just let me explain. I crossed my arms. Go ahead. She hesitated. I could see her brain working, calculating, trying to figure out what version of the truth would get me to forgive her. Then, finally, I was lonely. I scoffed. Lonely? She nodded quickly. You've been so distant lately. Work, stress, everything. I just felt like we were growing apart and I didn't know how to fix it. I blinked. So instead of talking to me, you booked a weekend with another man? She winced. I know it sounds bad, but it is bad, Meredith. Her eyes filled with tears. I never wanted to hurt you. I felt something inside me snap. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. You never wanted to hurt me? Are you serious? She flinched at the edge in my voice, but I couldn't stop. You planned this, I said, my voice quiet but sharp. You lied to my face. You snuck around. And then you went away for the weekend, knowing damn well that when you got home, you were going to crawl into our bed and act like nothing happened. She opened her mouth, but I wasn't done. You didn't care about hurting me, Meredith. You just cared about not getting caught. She let out a shaky breath. I made a mistake. No, I said flatly. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is saying something in anger. This was a choice. She shook her head frantically, the tears finally spilling down her cheeks. I love you. I stared at her. Those words should have meant something. But now? They were just noise. Do you? I asked. She blinked. Of course I do. I leaned forward slightly. Then tell me, if I hadn't found out, would you have told me? Silence. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. And that was my answer. I nodded slowly, standing up. That's what I thought. She reached for me, panic flashing in her eyes. Please, we can fix this. I stepped back. No, Meredith. You broke this. And I'm not picking up the pieces. I didn't sleep that night. She did, curled up on the couch, crying herself to exhaustion. I sat in our bedroom, staring at the ceiling, listening to the occasional sniffle from the other room. I had loved her. I had given her everything. And this was how she repaid me? It wasn't just the cheating. It was the lies. The gaslighting. The way she had looked me in the eye and chosen him. Over and over again. I felt the numbness settle in. And in that moment, I knew. I was done. The next morning, I walked downstairs and found her sitting at the kitchen table, her eyes puffy, her fingers curled around a half-empty cup of coffee. She looked up at me the second I entered the room. I didn't say anything. I just placed a single piece of paper on the table in front of her. Her face crumbled as she read it. Divorce? She choked out. I nodded. Her hands trembled. You're just giving up on us? I exhaled. Meredith, you gave up on us the second you walked into that hotel room with him. She let out a broken sob, shaking her head. No, we can work through this. I'll do anything. Counseling, therapy, whatever it takes. I clenched my jaw. You don't get to make that decision anymore. She looked at me desperately. What about everything we built? I met her gaze. It wasn't real, was it? Her face shattered. She let out a small, strangled cry, covering her mouth with her hands. I watched her for a moment. Then I turned around and walked out the door. And this time? I wasn't the one being left behind. Epilogue. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. She begged. She pleaded. But I never looked back. I moved into a new place, a smaller apartment, but one that felt clean. Untouched by memories of what we used to be. One night, months later, I got a text from an unknown number. I stared at it for a moment before opening it. Meredith, I miss you. Can we talk? I stared at the screen. Once I would have given anything to hear those words. But now? I just turned off my phone and went to bed. Because I was finally free. And for the first time in a long time, I was happy.